this computer. All right, good evening, guys. Ken at Tortoise Capital. This is the Foundation's Q&A for September 28th, 2023. It's simultaneously the last formal meeting for the previous cohort and kind of a preview of coming distractions for Jonathan.
Oh,
But as we're going to learn, as he'll learn, this is really a continuous work in progress. And so, although we bill it as a 10-week course, and the first 10 weeks I think are really important to maintain a certain momentum to get through the material. But it would be a shame if you stopped after 10 weeks because there's probably 110 weeks worth of material, and you're going to be generating a lot of that material as you think about things and work through it and come back to it and see it from a different lens. So there is very much a spiral approach that seems to be in play in this course, the way it is worked out. So, if we're trying to climb the mountain to get to wisdom, that pathway is very much a spiral. Oops, I can't really draw that very well. And we have some kind of little base camp down here. And you have to focus and really work hard to get to the top of that so you can see far. But at the same time, it's really not useful until you brought it back here and you put it into practice where the rubber meets the road, and it's knowledge in action that matters. And so one of the things that I'll do in the foundations and in the creativity course is record everything. And I just learned since really COVID started that every time I don't record something, I regret it shortly thereafter. And there's something about the recording that brings a degree of seriousness and accountability to what we're doing. I'm better when I'm recording. Like if there's a night where I miss a session or something from because of soccer, that's really the only thing that can make me miss. And then I record it later, but without an audience, it doesn't have the same flavor. In the same way that I think live concerts bring out the best in certain bands, the live nature of what we're doing brings out the best of the collaborative material. So there are a few things that I want to talk about. The first one is the idea of true storytelling insights, and in this learning circle that we have, what you're going to see is that there are really three bodies of knowledge that are coming together. There's something like technical trading. That's the things that I know and which I'm representing from our community of practice, that we've hammered out over the last 35 years. There's also story science, and this comes from Professor Angus Fletcher and the Project Narrative at Ohio State University, which is the world's leading think tank on the scientific approach to using storytelling to provably improve our measured creativity by any measure that you want to use. And we've used a number of them. Storytelling done properly measurably improves the leadership and creativity of the participants, which is kind of neat. Angus comes from a background in neuroscience and literature, and his book Wonderworks documents the 25 of the most important technologies that come out of storytelling since 2000 BC and onward. And I say technology because of the elements and the tools and the processes of stories that have endured that long end up becoming artifacts that can be used in recovering our primitive state of creativity. In his view, we've got this evolutionary brain that has adapted from the savannah, and because of our nature as a social, tool making, tool sharing, tribal mammal that was shorter, smaller, slower, weaker than all of the other predators, the things that we evolved that allowed us to move up the food chain can be connected to language, our tribal collaborations, our opposable thumbs, and fine motor control, and the ability to operate in different time frames and to have a small amount of willpower that allows us to defer gratification sometimes, and then tell stories about the results. And then all of those things conspire to create culture, which can be transmitted through stories effectively in pre-written language and then in written language. And so the accumulated evolutionary advantage of all that has adapted a brain that can't help but tell stories, except our education in the Prussian model, if we can say it that way, has sort of interfered with our ability to be spontaneous, visionary, brave, collaborative, because of the desire to be right, as opposed to living our story. So Fletcher comes from this whole world of adaptive evolutionary biology, which leads you to story science, replicable techniques that can improve our creativity and allow us to tap back into that natural state of the brain, if I can say it that way. Interestingly, he and one of my students just got published today in Harvard Business Review on the techniques that Angus and my student have put together to teach the special operations forces, the Green Berets and such, these practical techniques of story science to increase the creativity of our special ops forces. So that comes from a study that we did where I teach at the Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, where we did a very large research project on the efficacy of Fletcher's story science, which got published in the New York Journal of Science, and is the second most downloaded article in their history already. So there's a lot of there's as much science behind that as you want, which shows that it works. And the article on the HBR talks about VUCA, which is a mental model of a open systems chaotic world pioneered by the Army War College back in the 60s and 70s to describe the emerging global order. And it deals with volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Now, each of these are independent measures of challenges in the world. So if you took a world and you put those four dimensions on it, what you would see is that there's an increase in all of them lately, and they're measuring different things. Volatility talks about rate of change and the magnitude of the change and the relative change of change, the second derivative of change. So volatility is a trader's friend, and that rate of change stress tests all of our desires to be simple and methodical. And so the rate of change is key. Uncertainty deals with how much of the world we don't know. So if I can say I have some handle on that much of the world, then uncertainty is sort of the what else is out there that I don't have a handle on or I'm not even aware of, the unknown unknowns. How much of that can I say that I know something about in order to treat that as a sample? And do I know enough to say, is the sample that I know about useful enough to make predictions about the unknown portion? So it's sort of the reliability. So Taleb talks about that in the fourth quadrant and anti-fragile. So that just the degree of how much you know about the situation. Complexity has to do with the numerical complexity of a thing. So if we were to take a look at this world and say, hey, there's 20 variables that matter, and they scale from 1 to 10 in a linear fashion, we could take that linear divergence or variation, multiply it by 20 variables, and we would come up with some degree of complexity. But if there were 5,000 variables and the number of gradations was 1 to 1,000, then we would say that degree of complexity is much more challenging than the other one. This might be knowable and computable. This might be beyond computable. It might be intractable. Ambiguity has to do with the clarity of the data that we do have. So if we say we knew something in this sample of the world, we might say, hey, this fact number 1 supports explanation A, or it supports explanation B. Ambiguity rears its ugly head when the fact that you have can actually be used as evidence for more than one mutually exclusive conclusion. So that ain't helping. That's going the other direction. Well, each one of these things has independence. And you can actually say V times uncertainty times complexity times ambiguity, and you can come up with something like how challenging is the world to bring order to that madness. In the same way that if I took the complexity and said, hey, it's not just 5,000, but on any given day there's some power function where it's increasing or decreasing and the size and scope is changing. So while I'm trying to compute something for a static slice of the world, it's changing faster in ways I can't even measure. It's changing faster than I can even compute the thin slice of the world that I did take. So that leads to, well, what's that have to do with trading and all that other stuff? Well, one of the ways that Fletcher says our brain is adapted for exactly that kind of world, like this didn't just happen lately, although we think it does, because we have a belief that, it's never before have things been this complicated and unsafe. Really? Never before? How about electricity or atomic power or steel and iron and meteorites and what? Really, that nobody ever had challenges before us. So anyway, well, what Angus says is that story thinking, and that's his latest book, is actually a model of processing that gives you the skills to be able to engage in this kind of world and to do useful things that are better than random. You know, the naive approach says you can't, it's not even a point in thinking about it. You might as well just react. Except that our evolutionary brain has demonstrated the fact that when you think in stories, you do better in exactly this kind of world because it's well suited for engaging with VUCA, whereas animals, not so much. They're optimized for certain small segments that are stable in their environment and their ecosystem, but that world is both getting smaller and more dynamic, and so VUCA favors a brain that can think in stories, which is not conducive to traditional Western educational methods that favor certainty and prediction and reliability and the sage on the stage. So in the Prussian model, you know, the professor professes and he transmits that message to the student who internalizes it and then repeats it back, and then he validates that you said exactly what I said, and so now you get a gold star and now you can profess. Well, first principles thinking would say it's not the particular message, but it's the methods and processes and the sensing that needs to get in here so that when you engage in the world, you can bring first principles thinking and you can come up with something new that he never thought of. So it's the difference between education and training. Well, story thinking is designed for this kind of world. So that's the basis of Fletcher's work. Now, at the True Storytelling Institute, one of my mentors is David Boji, who has grown up with storytelling. In fact, he created the discipline of organizational storytelling about 40 years ago and is still the number one cited academic author in that area. Now, he comes from a different angle, whereas Angus puts people in a MRI and measures brain state activity and how it changes when you read different kinds of literature, science. Boji comes from a literary critique school, much more like the deconstruction and postmodern hermeneutics and that kind of shit, phenomenology and alternate ways of knowing and indigenous ways of knowing that are non-traditional to the Western world. Well, what's interesting is I may be the only person in the world that talks with both of those guys, and I know things about markets. And I take the position that the world is a really good teacher about the market. The market is the best teacher of the market, and it's trying to tell traders something in the form of information and dialogue and storytelling, and that if you can listen to the messages and the stories of the market, maybe you can use your adaptive brain to survive and then thrive as the world turns, if I can say it that way. Well, it turns out that the synergy of this is really powerful. And when you bring those three things together, like we have in the Creativity 202 course, you end up getting the following phenomenon. We use essays, 30 essays and experiential learning exercises from 30 chapters from Fletcher's handbook, which he wrote for the Army at my request. And then you do some exercises and reflect on them. And then I provide for each lesson, based on the theme that was in the story, some kind of experiential learning exercise that comes from the world of technical trading and the work that we do, for example, in the Foundations course. And then we come together in a true story circle, much like this one, where we talk about the work that we did, and we use the principles of Boji's true storytelling circles in order to craft knowledge in the following powerful way. So, if you think about the story of the blind man and the elephant, there were 6 blind men around the elephant, and this guy felt the ears and said the elephant is like the leaves of a big tree because it has the. And this guy says, no, the elephant is like a snake because he was feeling the trunk. And no, he's like a tree because he was feeling the legs. No, he's like the wall of a house because he was feeling the side. And, other guys. So each one of those blind guys knew something about the elephant that nobody else did, but they only had a thin slice. And the traditional response to that is, look at these silly monkeys thinking that they can learn something about the elephant when it's beyond any one of their individual abilities to appreciate. But what they don't necessarily say is, what if these guys shared a common language and had an attitude of sharing and truth-telling and had learned to develop trust in each other and were good listeners, and they could share each of their perspectives. It turns out that the unity of their insights tell you something really powerful about the nature of the elephant, in the way that if each one only knew 10%, you start telling the stories about that, and pretty soon you start filling in the gaps, and the elephant nature begins to be revealed in that way. And so when I make this pitch to senior leaders like 4-star generals in the Army, what I say about true storytelling is this. I said, how much time in your career in meetings have you spent trying to determine how the other bastards in that meeting were trying to get you with their hidden agendas and their deceitful nature? About 90 to 95% of the time. And about 5% of the time, once you've proven that maybe they're not out to get you, or you figured out what their scheme was, you have a little bit of time and energy left maybe to do something collaborative. Well, that's why it's so hard to get anything done in groups, is because you're spending all your time protecting your rice bowl and your agenda and your values and all that. But I tell them, what would you say your potential is if you could believe that everybody in that meeting was there to tell the best truth that they could about our common problem in the best way that they could, in a way that was designed to uncover the truth of the situation so that all the people might thrive and were willing to listen carefully and all that. So it turns out to be astonishingly amazing. And if we could only get a 3% improvement in performance of problem solving with that improved set of values, you multiply a 3% improvement per year on a $1 trillion Department of Defense budget, and you have a net present value of about $35 billion a year. And then the good general officers realize that, oh, since everybody in the Army is a leader, anytime 2 leaders come together, if you could get a 3% improvement in their collaborative actions, you're actually compounding 3% at the rate of leader transactions. And there may be 50 per person per day. So the compounded return of a 3% nudge because of true storytelling is astronomical. I did some math to estimate it to be worth about, conservatively, $100 trillion. And I gave some stories about why. And you get to 100 trillion if you say there was something in the collaboration between 2 leaders somewhere that stopped the monkeys from blowing up the world with nuclear weapons. And the value of that over 30 or 40 years is about $100 trillion when you do the math. So that's the midpoint estimate. The conservative estimate of the value of this combination of an increase in creativity from story science and the collaborative power of trusting groups that are telling the truth with stories about any particular piece of technical knowledge you want to learn, any discipline. It turns out when you bring those three things together, you have the maximum sustainable rate of collaborative learning, and it's astonishing how powerful that is. That's the nature of the Charlie 202 creativity course. Well, the foundations course that we're in right now really is representing and emphasizing specific goodies that are demonstrably useful to the world of trading. So we're concentrating on this area. But we actually are using the check-in sessions and the office hours for guys who are at different points in the learning to come together in a true story circle. So instead of Charlie 202, I'm just going to say, hey, in the Foundations Story Circle, FSC, Foundation Story Circle, what we're doing is we're exploring the technical knowledge of the Foundations course, this big capital F, and we're telling true stories about what we learned or what we're uncertain about and sharing insights from many different angles in the same way the six blind men and the elephant. And then when we express that in stories and make artifacts of it, we end up getting a really powerful synergy of group learning that goes well beyond the 10-week course. Like a lot of the material that's in Foundations and the things that I share variously are things that we've developed over 35 years of our work as a community of practice dedicated to each other's success and trying to get our arms around this world. We've been doing true storytelling and story science before we even put a name on it. Well, that has allowed us to really refine the minimum mission essential ideas of the Foundations course and then share them in a trusted circle and then use principles of story science to lock all this stuff in. So I say all of that simply to say that what you'll see in the Foundations course then is the expectation that you guys are coming in as co-creators of the knowledge. That there's so much stuff in the Foundations course, and honestly, I don't know if you could get through it to an acceptable level of depth in just 10 weeks. But once you start, if there's a bunch of, mine shafts in there and you start excavating, just whatever you're working on, bring that idea or that question to the circle and we'll talk about it, and invariably it's going to connect to something that somebody else is interested in, and you're going to retain that and see insights a lot more effectively than if you just treated this as a call and a response, or I'm just going to listen to the videos and I'm just going to somehow get it. The other thing that I would say is that the knowledge is coming from the practice of knowledge in action. And this is where I would distinguish the approach to learning that's different between Van Tharp and I. That I very much see this as craft knowledge. That's all. Yeah, I mean, like, it's just blacksmithing, which making samurai swords and tools and all that other stuff. There's a spiritual element to it, but it's the knowledge and action in the world. And so you will hear me refer to the walking man and the 5 ways of knowing all the time. And the walking man is an artifact that comes from true storytelling, and it says that we know things with our head, which is like propositional knowledge, which is we can think of as the theoretical elements of learning, the sage on the stage in that sense. We have the knowledge of the heart, which has to do with our identity and our values and our better self and the vision of where we want to be at the end state, our goals and objectives that we're striving for. And that's really a kind of values-based knowledge. There is the knowledge of the gut, which is really a fear-based knowledge. It is the adaptive mechanism of our psychosocial emotional brain, which acknowledges the limits of our rationality. That we have learned the hard way that the world, with its VUCA, is more than our tiny little rationality can handle. Although we really emphasize that a lot, and we think that the world, like Descartes, is all rationality. We've learned that there are things beyond our rational control, the fat tails, that you better be prepared for those consequences, that there's a tiger in every bush. Well, not really, but in 1,000 bushes there might be one tiger, but all it takes is one tiger to ruin your day. So the knowledge of the gut is the little provisional footnote which says all of your rational knowledge is an approximation of what we can know about the world through our rationality anyway. And our scientific method, which is the best expression of that rationality, acknowledges that with the limits of what we can know and the fact that it tries to disprove our tentative theories. So there's always at the cutting edge of VUCA tigers and dragons out in here. So the knowledge of the gut is the thing that is concerned about what is about to enter our space that's going to overturn our carefully constructed apple cart of rationality. I believe that where traders get into trouble is that their rational mind, which is optimistic and reasonable, wants to trade back-tested systems at the maximum level of risk that you could possibly stand. And our gut somehow says, I don't know how to say it or prove it, but I think there's uncertainty out there that's waiting to trick us. And so it sends countermanding signals and makes it difficult to just follow the rules that our rational mind has accepted. And that is because I think we have an optimistic mind, we have a reasonable mind, and we have a fear-based emotional mind, which is concerned with the threat that's about to hit us that we can't see yet, which is right at the edge of perception. So there is something like the edge of perception that we can respond to things that appear on that event horizon. And so we've tried to learn how to detect tigers far enough out that we can do something to shoot them before, or whatever. So in my teaching and in my belief system, I say that what you've got to do is embrace the emotional, fear-based gut mind and demonstrate to its satisfaction that you have accommodated the fears that it is reasonably worried about, and that you're not going off the deep end with your rationality, and that you have to use language and techniques that appeal to the emotion-based mind and not things that are persuasive to your head. Because what's persuasive to your head is backtesting and math and statistics and all that. But what appeals to your fear-based mind is something like high reliability organizations which believe the plans are always going to fail, and they look for evidence that it's going to fail, and they erect overlapping layers of protection so that when errors happen, we can trap it before it gets to the vital center. So we've got layers and layers of security and safety, and we've got to make our fear-based mind satisfied that we have accommodated its legitimate fears and that we're not trading at too large a level of risk. So that connects back to Van's teachings on psychology and risk management, and in a really powerful way. That is the source of all the problems that we have with following the rules of systems. If I asked you what annual rate of return you would like to have that was unconstrained, you might say, if you were normal, 200% per year. And I say normal based on interviewing 500 Van Tharp Institute students over the years in the systems workshop. They said, well, if you're not going to put it, I'd like to aim for 200% a year in my design. And then I ask them, if I could get you a reasonable confidence that you could get 200%, how much drawdown could you tolerate before you suspend? And they say 50%, which is 4-to-1. And that's a reasonable perspective. Now, if I ask that question in a different way, if I start with, what is the maximum level of drawdown that you can tolerate before you stop trading a system, and you run that through your experiential lens, that number turns out to be 10%. Validated by the experience of hedge funds and accredited investors who, at a 10% drawdown from highest level achieved, they experience massive withdrawals. So in the practical real world of trading, 10% is about the limit of what people can tolerate. Well, why is that? Because if I start with $100 and I lose 10%, I'm at 90, I have to score 11% with the $90 remaining to get back to 100. But if I lose 50%, I have to get 100% to get back to the starting point. So the risk of ruin and recovery drops off asymptotically, and that 10% drawdown turns out to be the biological limit of what the population can tolerate, which is why when the market is where it is, like right frickin' now at a 10% sell-off from the recent swing high, you're seeing all kinds of volatility and concern at the beginning of a correction. So the language of the market is that 10% is a correction and 20% is a bear, but it acts like 5% is a correction and 10% is when people that are aggressive start pulling things out. And the people that are aggressive are the ones that have large sums of money and using leverage, and that's why you see volatility suddenly increase when there's a 10% drawdown from highest high in the correction. It leads to interesting times. Well, so if the first way of knowing is propositional knowledge, knowledge of the head, and the second way is the knowledge of the heart based on values, and the third way is the knowledge of fear and emotion and gut, and it worries about risks to the enterprise. The fourth kind of knowledge is the knowledge of your hands, which is the skillful knowledge of craftsmanship on how to do things with artifacts, tools, and processes that give us leverage to use all of these great ideas from our head to win in a dangerous world. So craftsmanship is the reliable, repeatable, professional knowledge of skill that separates us from novices or amateurs or hobbyists, that there is such a thing as skillful action based on craft knowledge. Now, there's ways that you can be satisfied that you have it or can prove it. We use statistics for that. So that's the ability to make one bowl reliably time after time, that you can reliably craft that bowl. And the more bowls that you create, we're looking for continuous improvement and building craft knowledge. So through repetition and skillful learning, we can develop that craft knowledge. And if we treat teaching and coaching as a form of craft knowledge, then there are ways that we can do that better to create the maximum sustainable rate of learning of craft knowledge that is practically useful in the world. That's where this intersection of story science from Fletcher, true storytelling, and my tortoise trading, these three things come together, and the synergy I propose gives us maximum sustainable rate of legitimate professional craft knowledge that will sustain us robustly going forward. Hey, Ken, I just want to know what time it is. You're trying to teach me how to make a watch. Yeah, it's because things change. And if you look at TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, there's kids that are 20 years old that have never seen a bear market that know one pattern and had beginner's luck and are teaching people how to buy lottery tickets. Okay, well, you can do that if you want. I'm not going to do that with my 200-year time horizon for investing. In the last 30 years, we've seen 4 different market events where the market has lost more than 50%. In every one of those, our techniques gave us the best year of trading that we ever had in each one of those, and limited our worst drawdown in any of them to less than 8%. And we've saved people many millions of dollars in that. It's at the fat tails that you find out who knows anything. And so there's something to be said for endurance and survival, but also being open to learning and adapting and what's different and what's the same today. So the craft knowledge is the 4th degree of knowledge, or the 4th kind of knowledge. The 5th form of knowledge would be what I call the knowledge of the feet, which is how you survive and thrive on a journey of 10,000 miles, which starts with a single step. And so as you iterate, you start learning things unconsciously, because that's one of the natures of professional knowledge, is that we have in another model, propositional knowledge is that rational theoretical. There is an experiential knowledge, which is, and this comes from the world of action research. So experiential knowledge is the knowledge that you get by doing things. As Mark Twain said, there are things that about cats that you can only learn by trying to grab one. And I think that's true. There is also practical knowledge, which is connected to this knowledge of the feet, which says, through repetition and study, I learned to internalize and sublimate things that I'm not even aware of, because I have the ability to focus on 2 to 7 things with my conscious mind. But when you're in the machine shop, or if you're, I like this one, on road marches, and if you get a pebble in your shoe, you learn how to adjust your gait so that that stone will not become a problem until you can stop and take it out. So you end up making adjustments without even being aware of it. So when you talk to experts, and this comes from the work of Gary Klein, expert knowledge, when they try to create expert systems out of what that guy knows, it turns out that even with a skilled knowledge navigator, they're able on the first pass to only represent about 30% of what it is that they know. And that about 70% of it is tacit knowledge, which is at the level of DNA or cellular or in your hands, and it's your flow or how I just knew it was my spider sense. And it's only by systematically and iteratively trying to excavate that you can get deeper and deeper into the expert knowledge. That's one of the things that happens through our storytelling and the teacher student relationship is that when I try to explain things to you guys and it's not working, I find new ways to explain it to you based on where I think you are and what might resonate with you. And so when I'm trying to teach you something about the bowl, when I was a novice and I looked at the bowl, I saw it from one perspective. And as I grew in skill until I became a master, I started learning by doing, and I started getting a three-dimensional look at that bowl. Now that I know something about how I trade, and I try to tell the next newest novice, it's coming from a different perspective. And it's not until I come over to where the novice is and share your point of view and listen carefully to what you ask and what you claim to know that I can determine if you're seeing the same bowl that I am. And so in the martial arts, to get beyond that third degree black belt, you must engage in a teaching process so that you can set aside all the things that you learned along your path and learn to see that bowl once more in its basic primitive primeval state through the eyes of the novice, and then together we can climb that mountain with our combination of collaboration. Well, that's where the true storytelling principles and values come in that allow us to engage in non-judgmental, truthful exchange of ideas and insights as we attempt to ascend the mountain. So the practical knowledge is the learning by doing that is resident at an unconscious or subconscious level that we actually have to go get. And it's only through effortful action that you can go down there and get it. And we use stories to investigate and then to bring that up to the surface and to share it. The fourth way is what's called presentational knowledge. And that turns out to be the form of knowledge that's only available to you when you try to share what you know in words and stories to others. And you do your best to express it from your point of view and your background and what would be good communication to you. So I start off by telling you a story that would resonate with me. But it's through feedback and dialogue that I learned to adapt that story so that it works for you. And then in the telling of the story in a new way, almost every time I gain insights about that knowledge that I never heard before in that way. And it gives me a deeper understanding of the things that I thought I already knew. And that comes out of what we have seen in true story circles in the more than 500 that I've run outside of the trading community, and then in the probably 1,000 that I've run inside the trading community. And what we've learned when people come to the research weekend and tell their stories, or when students come in and are brave enough to show their work in the story form or working together as accountability partners, that we learn to go deep into our subconscious and pull that knowledge out and bring it up to the surface to explore and examine as part of the courageous act of learning in public together. That's an incredible act of emotional courage to be able to share exactly where you are and what your questions are. There are no bad questions, only bad people. Just remember that. And we're not going to judge us. So I say all of that to remind the boys why we do it this way and why it may feel messy at times, but stories are messy. When you commit to letting the story out, the story ends up going where it wants to go without you trying to channel it or corral it or control it. You end up surrendering to the story and let it out, and then others will give you guidance and feedback on how to improve it, and then that ends up producing really powerful stories, which can become, when we record them, and that's why we record it, is so that it can become an artifact. And if I find myself drawing these sketches in the same way, I may end up turning that into a slide that's easier to read. Because if you hadn't listened to this and just saw this as the graphic, you'd say it looks like graffiti or a dog's breakfast or the output of a shredder, and you'd be right. But if you went back through this and listened to it again and saw the storyboard unfolding, maybe it sticks better. Well, what I've found is that there's a part of me that recognizes there's a story about what I'm trying to say gurgling along here, coming out of the dark places in my subconscious, and that just before I release it onto the whiteboard, there's a part of me that's listening and testing and wondering, how can I say that so that that next little puzzle piece can connect to what's already out there? And now I see what I need is something that makes those connections. How could I tell that story in a certain way? And something will come bubbling up and I can test it real quick. And I've learned with a pen in my hand and listening to what I'm about to say 2 seconds before I say it, I just end up saying it, and I trust that I can steer it into a useful connection based on the feedback that I'm getting from you guys as we go. And so now this little mosaic starts getting built, story fragment and artifact at a time, and then we can actually turn that into maybe something that's clear and succinct and a process checklist. But there's something dynamic. This is where the story thinking connects this deep, dark well of experience with a communication skill that allows us to form the dynamic story that's new each and every time. I never step in the same river twice. The Grateful Dead or the Allman Brothers playing live at the Fillmore East that capture that song never played that way before or since. And then it can be crafted into maybe something that is be concise, and then maybe we can turn that into rules and processes and checklists, which become very efficient artifacts that allow us to leverage the output of a analog dynamic nonlinear process, which Fletcher calls story thinking. And storytelling is how we get that direct experience and our emotional reactions up to the point where we can tell it, and then it can become formalized. That's the nature of the weekly check-ins for foundations. In foundations, there are 4 courses. There's the base camp, or boot camp. There's the 37 strategies, which is a top-down 30,000 foot flyover over 43 different ways that we approach the markets in various time frames and strategies, some of which may resonate with you and you want to explore. So rather than going deep into each and every one of those, we just say, hey, the foundations gives you the nuts and bolts of tools that work in every time frame and in most systems. And the 37 strategies gives you the large flyover so that you can figure out quickly which areas you want to concentrate in so you can focus on that. And maybe it's the core, and maybe it's the swing trading, and maybe it's day trading, or maybe it's the combination of those in hybrid trading that blends together those 3 elements in a useful personal way, using the skills, knowledge, and attributes of foundations. And then the 3rd and the 4th course has to do with Psychology 1, which is key insights about the psychology of trading that we've discovered through practice. And then Psychology 2, which is about 10 or 15 experiential learning exercises that put you in a situation and ask you to think about it and then emerge from it with reflective learning, which is psychology in action, which is connected to something powerful in the boot camp portion of foundations. And you can probably get through that to a sufficient level of depth that it's useful in about 10 weeks if you put 2 to 3 hours of work, good hard work a week into this. You might go a little faster, but less than 3 hours a week, and you can't really get through it in a useful way as a serious person. Now, the other thing that we have in foundations is all the check-ins. Like this one, there's going to be all kinds of Q&As, and the guys that are in here have gone through 12 or 20 of those in the last 10 weeks. And so there's about 20 hours of those things. And every one of them was kind of unscripted and free-flowing in the way this thing was, but ends up connecting to some profound ideas. And if I can get me an intern to render each one of those check-ins to a single note sheet using the Cornell note sheet that you will see that Phil Wu did for the Foundations course, you'll see that we'll be able to accelerate the value of those by making it more accessible. And we've got not just the cohort that's finished, but about the last 5 cohorts. Oh, crap. That means there's 100 extra hours of material that could be really, if you found this interesting or useful at all, there's 100 hours of that. And if you were going to listen to that over 10 weeks, that's an additional 10 hours a week just to get through the 100 Q&As. And now I just blew up the model of being able to study those 4 courses with 2 to 3 hours of study a week. That's why I say you have an unlimited lifetime of access to this material to continue to engage at your preferred rate. And as I get some staff support, we're going to start turning the Q&As into more concise ideas. But it turns out that a lot of the big ideas that are in foundations end up getting expressed in new ways in those. So there's some lively repetition that's valuable. What you can do is kind of go through those in sequence, like maybe listen to the first 2 sessions of each one of those or something, or I don't know. Or take a look at the titles of them. Or just trust that if you have a good question, all you really need to do is get after those foundations and then the 37 strategies and Psychology 1 and 2 and listen to the Nightly Strategy podcast and come with one good question or an aha moment for that week's work in progress. And if you give that to me a day ahead of time, I can craft that into a timely Q&A session that is geared to meet you where you are inside this ecosystem of learning. So wherever you are, and if you've seen that much and you have that question, that's the question I want to answer in this session for you because it's your dime. I'm going to record that so that everybody else that is also monkeying around in this can have access to it because it's going to add value to them because they may not even have known they had that question. So what I'll tell you is concentrate on 2 to 3 hours of hard Army work for the foundations first. Then I would go to the strategies, then Psychology 1 and 2 in that order. 2 to 3 hours. I would listen to as many of the nightly podcasts as you could because you're going to pick up the how to trade that we're teaching in the foundations maybe even better that way if you just watch what I'm doing in the first 30 minutes of that nightly podcast since the start of this year. That's 180 sessions times 30 minutes. That's 90 hours of hybrid swing trading that combines the best of day trading and swing trading on 30-minute charts that has pulled out almost 1,000 R in 9 months. Just saying. Just saying. And then as soon as you're ready, and before you're even ready, and you pick one of those that you want to try, like the Kata 2 or a supported spring crossing, you post a live trading chart in the chat room in Campfire and do your best to express the idea that you're seeing and knowing and working on. And then look at it to see what you can learn from your own chart. And I'll give you feedback on that every night for 1 or 2 minutes. And you'll discover that that is the fastest way to internalize the rules in a way that is useful to you. Plus, you'll get to see me coaching these other monkeys as they go. And then from that, you may discover that you have an affinity or an alignment to work with an accountability partner who's trading in the same way. And now you can have a small learning group and learn together. So that's what I want to say about how to get the most value out of the Foundations course by understanding the components of the fire hose that you inadvertently walked in front of. I'm sorry about that. There's just no way around it. It's just going to suck. Can't help it. But that's, you signed up for it. Here's what I want to say about Forex and equities. Forex turns out to be very fluid and periodic, and you give up some of the enormous volatility of equities for something like channel trading with the occasional breakout and reversion to the mean. Because that equities work in a 7.5-hour segment, but Forex works in 3 8-hour segments where the different financial centers come online, like the U.S. and London and Asia. You end up getting 3 8-hour segments where you have volatility and then it monkeys around and volatility and monkeys around. So it turns out that if you use a longer time frame by a factor of about 3, you can use the same patterns from equities over the slower moving Forexes. We're showing there are guys that are crushing it on the 5-minute Forex, the 5-minute Aussie. Luke is crushing that thing. But you can also make bank on that on 30-minute bars and be very satisfied. But you need to just sort of learn that there's a difference between the pace and rhythm of those. PSAR exits, just use them. I'm just telling you. The PSAR is your friend. The good enough exit says, look, I don't know whether to take the aggressive sniper exit that my gut tells me or the rule-based conservative manager who is slow. I just say take a half with your gut and a half with your rules. Split the difference and stop thinking about it and stop worrying about it and just do it, and then calculate the expectancy and determine how to adjust your intuition, which will adjust itself over time, and you can use math and statistics to adjust the manager, and you're always getting the midpoint, and you will eliminate the cognitive load of trying to solve that problem inside of every single trade every day. Do yourself a favor and just do that. I've given you insights about true storytelling. There will be more to come in VUCA, the walking man, and the 4 ways of knowing. I'll talk about the 10 ox herding picks on Sunday. That's everything I wanted to say. We have 13 minutes before the nightly strategy podcast begins. In this same room, same password. And if you're not on, I think you're on Patreon for $25 a month. That's the best $300 you'll ever spend. I have to charge something for Patreon. They won't let me just give it away, or I would. But what you'll see in Patreon is the daily report is distributed through Patreon. The weekly report is distributed through Patreon. So you'll get an email to a link and you can download the report from there. I also record the nightly podcast in which I look at the hybrid swing trades, the sniper trade of the day intraday, the daily reports, and coaching of the foundation's traders. Those four elements are in every podcast, and those get recorded, and it lasts about 30 minutes to an hour and a half, usually an hour. And that gets posted in Patreon in an archive that goes back 3 years. So every one of there's 1,000 podcasts of an hour long. So I told you there was 100 hours of Q&As in foundations. There's 1,000 hours of nightly podcast trading workshops there. So you only got to listen to 100 hours a week for the next 10 weeks to get through all of that. So I'm telling you, don't try, but just start engaging with the foundations. Come to the nightly podcast, start sorting it out, ask good questions, and we'll steer you where you need to go. And you can add to your knowledge piece by piece in the same way that we make mosaics and tapestries. And then periodically you will get an aha moment. And then you will draw your own picture and write your own book and come up with your own models and integrate all that stuff. And you'll share that artifact, and somebody else will learn from that because of the way you integrated it. That's how we do it with True Storytelling. So the Patreon podcast archive plus the daily and weekend report archives go back 10 years. So Patreon is command central for the distribution of live trading information and all of those podcasts. And plus I just put a bunch of goodies in there, like the best of. Like if I said something smart tonight, and I may have, I'm going to put tonight's podcast as sort of a greatest hits song on there right at the top because it's that fucking good. Pardon my language. That's an example of the kind of language we will not tolerate in here. So there you are. So that's what I want to say. I would ask for your questions, but then the answer to that would take another hour, and then I'd be late for the other podcast. But that's kind of what it's like. It's a merry-go-round. So if you miss it the first time, it's coming around again. I only know a certain number of songs, and I'm going to keep repeating them until you either get it or you quit. And I trust your judgment on what questions to ask. There's no bad questions, and it takes courage to ask them. And if you ask it, 100 other people were afraid to ask it. That's the service that you do. And that's why I respect questions and answer them patiently, even if some guys have been in here for 10 years and said, Ken, you've answered that question 500 times. I will say, well, I'm going to answer it 501 times, and maybe this one will be better. Because I'm listening for how I answer those questions for something new, for my own understanding of my own work, because this is how I dredge it up out of my subconscious. That's the power of storytelling. So that's what I want to say for tonight. And then I owe you guys something on the 10 ox herding picks. At the risk of asking for a question, I'll say, any questions? If I'd have told you all that stuff at the beginning, which I did, Brian, you wouldn't have believed me, or you wouldn't have understood it, or you've forgotten it, or... But was there anything I said in there that wasn't true that you haven't already sort of come to the realization that it's the posting of the nightly charts that you do which puts the knowledge in your head and in your heart and your gut and your hands? We're trying to bypass
Absolutely.
your head and go right to your hands to do things, to make bowls. Make one wooden bowl. Okay, do it again. Keep going. That's where you take ownership of this material. This is a practice. This is craft knowledge. And everything we know from tens of thousands of years as human tool makers and industrial manufacturing and statistical process control, total quality management, Japanese manufacturing, Lean Six Sigma, that's where I grew up. And that's the sensibility that I bring to continuous improvement and learning circles and micro improvements with nudging, Kaizen and the Gemba. And this is where Greg says, hey, Ken, you now have 6 minutes to end this session, let it start recording, and start the next one. So thanks, Greg. I can hear you thinking. Hey, Jonathan, I just want to welcome you aboard. Thanks for the courage that it takes to give this a try. And looking forward to learning with you genuinely. Great group of folks to work with. You're in good hands.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm looking forward to it
Over.
too.
Once around the horn real quick. Jonathan, anything?
I just have some logistical questions about where things are in the material, but I can say those for Sunday with the group and pass those together.
So what I need you to specifically to do is, are you connected to Rizuku, the course in Rizuku, the actual course yet?
Well, I think so. I'm not sure what the website is, but it's
courses. I think I sent you like a registration link.
Yeah, it's courses.algroup.us is what I'm on.
And then you'll see the foundations course, and if I thought I might have it pulled up.
Well, I just wasn't matching up the course schedule with
the course schedule is really it's self-paced at your speed, and you can I would recommend you go through let me pull it up real quick because I have the screen still showing.
Some of the names for the lessons in the boot camp and the schedule weren't matching up with what's on that left column.
It's here's that is also a work in progress. So if you go to so in the foundations course, start with the overview of the course.
Yes.
And there's these are things that other students that have taken this that are sitting in your position that were where you were, and then they went through it and discovered, oh shit, I wish I knew this.
Okay.
So I front load that with like Chunlong and what I wish I knew at the start of the course from a happy student. Just go through those. This glossary 4.0, download that.
Okay.
Ruthless risk management. That was so good. I posted that in there.
I watched that.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And this one, I'm going to put this one up at the top of this thing and say, here's a new overview of how we're going to learn. So then this ecosystem has to do with, you could set that aside if you want, but there's a few top level ideas. I'm not sure I like it. I'm not sure it needs to be in there.
Okay.
This next one, the recording of the office hours. If you go to this one, like the first lesson, these are all the Q&A sessions that have been recorded from previous sessions, cohorts.
Okay.
Like these guys that are in here with you now, this is all of their 12 weeks of recordings, and I will put tonight's in here, week 12B. That's good. That recording tonight is going to go there. But then there's the April cohort, the January 22, and so on. Now, this other one, this next little thing on the side, this goes back more than 3 years ago, but it was like written questions and written answers. I wouldn't mess with that now. It's almost becoming overcome by events.
Okay.
Then there's the actual boot camp itself. And then this is all of the, the specific whoops, I just fucked that up. I just moved it and I didn't mean to. I'm sorry. Shit. Okay, yeah, there it is. Yeah, so yeah, be careful what you drag and drop. Right. So these are all of the specific. Every one of these is a chunk. Like the MACD and Red River, that is key and essential to understand one element of technical analysis that we use.
Okay.
The RLCO Generation 1, the seven patterns that we use to describe setups. Generation 2, those are the patterns that we trade. The owl, the supported spring crossing, the kata 2, the collapsing dragon. So that's the evolutionary patterns that we trade. So this boot camp here gives you key and essential ideas for trading in different time frames. Some are swing, some are day, some are common to multiple time frames. Everything that's in that boot camp actually turns out to be useful whether you are just going to be a day trader or a swing trader or a longer term position trader. It's kind of foundational and fractal. So that is the guts of the 37 strategies turned out to be just other big ideas that are useful that may help you in the future. Lowest priority. Psychology 1 of self-discovery. That one is pretty good because it'll help you get your arms around who you are as a trader. But with your experience at the Tharp Institute, you're going to be pretty deep on that already. So I think you could afford to defer on that. On the other hand, I could also make the argument that you could do that in 3 days. You could
Okay.
actually do it in 1 day because I had a kid who's a pro money manager here in Kansas City that did it in a week. And it was powerful and it made him a professional when he got
Okay.
done.
Got it.
So I actually think it wouldn't hurt you because of your background with psychology and the Tharp Institute that you could do that now and
Okay.
then get into and then the foundations courses, the lessons in there, take those at some kind of natural pace. You could listen to them at 1.5 to 1 speed and get through it quick. And if it doesn't resonate with you, don't just drive on to the next one. But if it gets your attention, it may be something that is at the right time and place for you and leads to questions.
Okay. Okay.
And then Psychology 2, coaching applications. Each one of these is sort of a deep dive into a learning laboratory of a psychological moment that asks you to engage at a deep level with some kind of story that's going to make you reflect at a foundational level and is really well suited towards reflective learning. And you're going to find those to be really, really powerful.
Okay. Great.
And so those are the four big courses. But like I said, there's all of, I would start with. In your case, I'm going to recommend probably the Psychology 1 for self-assessment and get through that. It's a different take on psychological self-awareness, and so that may give you an interesting shift of perspective from the VTI experience. It's a nice
Okay.
alternative, I
Okay.
think.
Good. Good. Okay.
And then I'd go right into the foundations, and then I would do Psychology 2, and then I would finish up with the 37 strategies.
Okay.
I think that's the way I would do it.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. All right. I really appreciate that. So that gives me a little some better direction with those.
Yeah, and this is we're almost becoming victims of our own success. Like the reason I even have this course is because I had accumulated hundreds of hours of teaching just for day trading, just for swing trading, just for core, and just for hybrid. And it was like, God damn, I need to give you guys some concise set of tools and perspectives that you could then you could leverage in those other styles. But then you start teach this for 3 or 4 years, and the feedback and the additions and the evolution start becoming. That's what prompted me to write the book, which is we're getting ready for final production, is to just turn this into a book for to let people read for readers. So anyway, so I'm going to apologize for all of the knowledge that we're throwing at you. Sorry, but not sorry.
No apology necessary. It's okay.
But not sorry. You know,
And I volunteer. So that's okay.
if you're a trader, you're kind of crazy anyway. And with your medical training, I already know that you're sort of irrational, and you know, just think of this as another residency. And
There's no doubt.
I mean, sleep is overrated. So,
That's
hey,
exactly how I'm thinking about it.
yeah.
So
So,
it's reclaiming.
send me your email questions whenever you get them. If I haven't answered within, I want to say 48 hours, send it again, because I try to clear the deck every day, but 2 days gives me a fighting chance to answer them. And if I haven't answered it in 2 days directly to you, then then I probably didn't see it,
Okay.
or
Okay.
I missed it.
That's
And
great.
and a lot of times I'll talk about it in the nightly podcast, and then send you a link and just say, hey, here's a question that came up. And
Okay.
so I try to keep it live, you know, sort of immediate feedback. And so it's like office hours are posted for Sundays and Thursdays, but I also am in here every night from 8:30 to complete anyway. It's not like I have a life outside of this much.
And that's the same link that I just joined tonight.
Yeah,
Daily
it's the
podcast.
same room, same location, same
Okay.
password, and
Okay.
it'll
That'll
always be the same.
too.
So
Okay.
I'm gonna, and for the guys that are in here waiting, wondering why the hell I haven't started the other one, that's suck it up, cupcakes. I'm gonna turn this off real quick so it can start processing the recording, and then I'm gonna start it right back up in about 2 minutes, and we'll get into the normal nightly podcast in about 2 minutes, fellas. So we'll see you again shortly, and thanks for hanging in there, Jonathan. Very nice to meet you. Ciao for now.
Thanks, Keaton.